You describe yourself as a seeker of systems change. What does that mean for you?
I guess it's a kind of what's the word? It's like a kind of a container concept that has stayed relatively stable in my way of making sense of the world for the last 20 odd years. It refers to me to a worldview which is holistic, which focuses on the relationships between elements rather than going deep into a particular discipline or a silo. I guess that the interconnectedness is something that I feel is critical both in understanding and engaging with our reality. And it's also something that I gel with personally. I like the intellectual challenge that it brings. I like the cross pollination, the weaving, networking, and I strongly believe that our current systems, whether they're economic or governance, food systems, energy systems, housing systems, most systems that shape our reality, our lives. First of all, they're human made. We're living in the Anthropocene, and second of all, they're pretty dysfunctional. They might have been designed with good intentions, but now what comes to mind is that I wrote a rap song, and the chorus is the way we live as a collective has proven to be so effective that the system we put in place ended up setting the pace. Now we're caught in our own invention. Was that ever the intention? So it might have had a function at some point, but right now most of these systems are obsolete, and we need system change, and that means that all these aspects need to change in sync. You can't just change the economy without changing governance. You can't change governance without changing people's perception of themselves and their relationship with nature. You can't change that without changing education, and so on and so forth. It's and then the seeking, I guess you can say this entire all-encompassing change is like the holy grail, which is probably unattainable. And the moment you think you have it is, just by thinking that probably creates new problems. So I prefer to be, forever seeking, and then, getting as close to it as possible. And so I also gravitate towards groups of humans that are trying to make sense of these holistic ways of both understanding reality and engaging with it and interfering with it. So I can share some examples of that. Like, I'm sure you've heard of like the Presencing Institute and Otto Scharmer and the U theory. So for me, it's one helpful approach. And there's Joanna Macy and the work that reconnects, and then there's a group in India called Vikalp Sangam. So I think what many of these communities of system change seeking have in common is that their frameworks are large enough to hold all this holisticness, and yet open enough to keep evolving. As we understand more, then we adapt the framework, like we adjust the tool. Otherwise, it becomes dogmatic and it turns into a religion, and then it loses its sense-giving potential.
I have, in fact, a few follow-up questions on that. The first one is, obviously, I was not aware that you are a rapper as well. So all the hidden tapes, we're gonna unfold them and put them at the end of the podcast or something. No, thank you very much. That was very entertaining and cool. And on a more serious note, you already described or touched on a couple of leading examples, and you are in fact involved in so many different projects. And before we maybe choose one or two, or we go for another N of those projects, in preparation for our podcast episode, I found a quote which I would like to read to you and get your personal experience on that. And this quote is by Gus Speth, who is an American environmental lawyer and advocate who co-founded the Natural Resource Defense Council. I'm sure you are aware of him. The quote reads the following. I used to think the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address those problems. But I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. I think the obsession with science, and especially the Western, school of science, is part of the system, malfunction. And it's also part of why we're not able to see the malfunction in other, aspects of the civilization that we're caught up on. We're caught up in. If you can't measure something, then it doesn't exist. If you can't, do a replicable experiment, then then your knowledge is not credible, or not legitimate or valuable. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of things wrong with it. I think it's often very, we talk about this Cartesian split a lot, no? Where you distance yourself from the object that you're studying. So I feel also it's a very male approach to understanding reality, that we are afraid to be touched. So we put up this mask or this shield, and we say, oh no, the thing that I'm studying is out there and I'm just a spectator, and that will give me like a clear path towards pure knowledge. Whereas a more mutual transformation approach of understanding and engaging with the world would be that, as I am inquiring into reality, the reality is changing and I'm part of reality. So while I'm also changing, and we're influencing itself, we're influencing each other. So it's more like a conversational approach to inquiry. I think we could call that science. It's just that science has been a little biased, or kind of what Vandana Shiva calls the monoculture of the mind. I like that a lot, because my entry point often to complex systems is through agriculture and food. So any saying that has a reference to farming, it resonates well with me. So the monoculture of the mind, to me, it feels like, it's like one type of thinking, which is obviously oversimplified, no? That you have the rational mind, you got the intuitive mind, you got if in Auroville we study Sri Aurobindo, and there's plenty realms of the being, including the mental, that's very, very diverse. So this person, Gus, or whatever his name is, I mean, if he's talking about an inner transformation as being the key to outer transformation, as in ecological transformation, I think they are the same. The selfishness and the greed and the feeling of scarcity and the insecurity, where that is coming from, is directly connected to climate change and to overconsumption. I think Charles Eisenstein writes really nicely about that, where he speaks of that the drive to consume comes from like an unfulfilled yearning to belong in community. But with our current model of civilization, we're not acknowledging the need and the yearning for a community. So actually, we're killing off community, because community doesn't make you money, it doesn't add to your GDP. So then you create, the vacuum, and in order to fill the vacuum, people will start consuming, that ends up eating the planet. And then we're like, oh shit, there's like lack of resources. Now I'm afraid whether there'll be enough for me. So then I retreat even further from other humans around me. And I create even more barriers, and there's even less scope for a community. And so it's a vicious cycle. I definitely think that an impoverished view of inquiry into reality, which is current science, has a lot to do with that. Another group of people who talk a lot about that is the Plan B people, like Daniel Schmachtenberger and all, where science is a very competitive industry these days. You have to like rank up high in your quotation indexes and da da. I don't think that brings out the best in our collective intelligence at all. So yeah, I think both in terms of the kind of thinking, it's not very helpful, and then definitely in the way that it's institutionalized, it's not very helpful. But also, I think the dichotomy is not very helpful. I think the inner change and outer change are part of the same dance, and I don't see what's the benefit of saying it should start there, or oh, it should start there. We sometimes use a kind of a meta frame where we look at design on the one hand and consciousness on the other. To me, that has helped, where from a particular level of consciousness, you can create particular types of design. Say if you are more evolved in your consciousness, then you can have a more nuanced, sophisticated, holistic design. And then from that design, humans who are participating in that design, and design, I mean, in the systems view, so it could be governance or economy or culture or whatever, you can attain, a more mature level of consciousness. And then from that more mature level of consciousness, yet you can imagine, other worlds. But it also works the other way, that if your consciousness is like suppressed and you're operating from a scarcity mentality, the kind of designs that you're coming up with are not going to be very inspiring, possibility enhancing. So this, to me, this is oh, my dogs are visiting. Hello, dogs. This dance between the inner and outer transformation feels like an important next step. After seeing that they are two different things, then we have scope for a synthesis between the two.
So if you like that, make sure to check out the full-length episode here and leave a subscribe. Thank you.